Recently, this year, we've seen a dramatic escalation in the discourse surrounding misinformation in Holocaust education, a troubling trend that threatens to distort our collective memory and erode the truths that bind us together. According to recent reports, the spread of falsehoods about the Holocaust has reached alarming levels, underscoring a crisis in our educational system that demands urgent attention. As tensions escalate in the Middle East, President Biden has been caught in a political crossfire, navigating accusations and conflicting narratives about the situation in Gaza. Critics have accused him of downplaying the gravity of the crisis, and closer to home, violent protests erupted outside synagogues have underscored the deep-seated divisions that plague our society, as well as the urgent need for meaningful dialogue and understanding. Adding to the volatility, former President Donald Trump has stirred the pot with incendiary remarks. In an interview aired in April on Real America's Voice, Trump asserted that Democrats are avoiding discussion of Hamas's deadly October 7th attack on Israel because Biden is, quote, no fan of Israel. Trump went further, stating that Jewish voters who support Biden, quote, do not love Israel, and, quote, should be spoken to. His comments have intensified the debate and added another layer of complexity to the already heated political discourse. Today, we're going beyond the headlines to explore a question that is central to these debates. What is the real nature of the relationship between American Jews and Israel? How have historical and contemporary issues shaped this complex dynamic? To help us unravel these questions, I'm thrilled to welcome a truly distinguished guest, Dr. Guy Golan, a renowned scholar and author of the book, My Brother's Keeper, The Complicated Relationship Between American Jews and Israel. Dr. Golan's work offers a nuanced examination of this intricate relationship, providing invaluable insights into the forces that have shaped and continue to influence American Jewish identity and its ties to Israel. So buckle up today, because this is going to be a fascinating journey through history, politics, and identity. Dr. Golan, thank you for being a part of the Political Mic this morning.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, Dr. Golan, as we approach the November election this year, there is growing speculation about how Jewish Americans will vote. Given the current political climate and recent controversies, what do you believe are the key factors that will influence Jewish voters' decisions? How might shifting dynamics in U.S. foreign policy and domestic issues shape their electoral choices?
Great question. It's actually kind of easy, Mike. American Jews have been amongst the most consistent voting bloc for the Democratic Party since the 30s. I mean, ever since the days of the Roosevelt coalition, American Jews have been a part of the Democratic Party, and with the exception of African Americans, there's no other voting group who voted more consistently for the Democrats than American Jews.
And what issues do you think are going to be determinative in how they make their decisions this year?
Let me give you some numbers, first of all. If you look at the last, 7 election cycles, typically you're going to see American Jews voting for the Democrats somewhere between 70 to 77%. So Al Gore received 77%. I believe Obama, in his first term, first presidential run, received 76. Hillary received 71 or 72. So typically, American Jews, the majority of them, over 70%, will vote for the Democrats. And what issues are important to American Jews? The same issues are important to other Democrats.
Dr. Golan, the ideological divide between American Jews and Israeli Jews is a long-standing issue, with American Jews generally leaning liberal and Israeli Jews often being more conservative. What historical and cultural factors have contributed to this divergence in your view? And how do you foresee this divide evolving in light of current global and domestic political trends?
Well, Mike, this is exactly what my book is all about. Our book with Professor Guy Chet deals with the differences between the two tribes of the Jewish people, equal in numbers, roughly 8 million in both nations. American Jews and Israeli Jews have completely different political sociology. And it stems from a very simple thing. American Jews are a very tiny minority, 2% within a largely Christian nation, and Israeli Jews are a majority in their own nation. So when you are Jewish in Israel, you are a part of the majority, And when you're an American Jew, you're part of a tiny minority. And as we know from the vast research in sociology, political sociology, majority groups and minority groups vote, and their political sociology is completely different.
Zionism has increasingly become a litmus test for many on the progressive left in the United States. How has this shift impacted the discourse within progressive circles and American Jewish communities? What are the implications of this trend for the broader Jewish community's engagement with progressive politics?
Fantastic question. Well, let's define Zionism, first of all. Everybody's talking about Zionism, but most people don't really know what Zionism means. Zionism is nothing short, it's just simple. It's the aspiration of the Jewish people to have their own homeland. So it's a national movement that started in the late 19th century in Eastern Europe, and it led to the formation of the Jewish state of Israel in 1948. Now, American Jews have always been a part of the progressive left. When you think about every single progressive cause out there, labor rights, gay rights, a civil rights movement, and any rights movement in the last 50 or 100 years, American Jews were amongst the leaders of it. But something happened in the last, I would say, 15 years. The rise of intersectional politics, which ultimately divides people between oppressor and oppressed, have left American Jews having to, as you said, to make a choice. Are you progressive or are you pro-Israel? In their view of the far left, Israel is an oppressive colonial state that oppresses indigenous people. And if you support Israel, if you're a Zionist, then you cannot be a part of the progressive left. And I think that if you go into those arguments, you're going to see a lot of holes in those arguments. But nevertheless, that is a prevailing narrative on the far left, the progressive left. You hear it in college classes, in college campuses. And guess what, Mike? Next week, school starts, or this week in some campuses, and the show is about to continue.
So, Dr. Golan, college campuses in the United States have become a flashpoint in discussions about rising anti-Semitism. The rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses has been a growing concern, with accusations of bias and discrimination becoming more prevalent. What factors do you believe have contributed to the rise of anti-Semitism in academic settings? How can universities and Jewish organizations effectively address and combat this phenomenon while promoting constructive dialogue, in your view?
The problem is the professors. When I started my career, I would say 20 years ago, the critical cultural scholars, so-called scholars, who argue, they're so-called scholars because they know what the results of their studies are before they begin. The results of every study they ever publish is that the United States is evil, white people are evil, capitalism is evil, and pretty much that worldview, neo-Marxist politics, has turned from something that used to be marginalized, like one person at the end of the hallway 30 years ago, into now being in positions of power. So you have endowed chairs, you have department chairs and deans who push this far left narrative. And I'll tell you, Mike, parents who are paying $50,000 a year don't want their children to learn to hate America on college campuses.
Poll after poll showed that younger Americans generally are less supportive of the U.S. role in the Israel-Hamas conflict, and they're especially opposed to military aid to Israel. Is there any legitimacy to their concerns about Israel being too oppressive to the Palestinians? You have folks who are within the generation of Gen Z and some millennials criticizing the administration. Joe Biden on TikTok and social media, Instagram, has been dubbed Genocide Joe. Is there any legitimacy to their critiques, in your view?
Well, I'm sure there's some legitimacy, but take this generation and ask yourself a different question. How do they view the role of the United States in the world? So look at every public opinion poll from the Pew Research Center, and what you're going to see is that the more to the left you are, and the younger you are, the more you view the role of the United States as negative in the world. On the other hand, older, more conservative people view the United States as having a positive role in the world. It goes back to the narrative that we spoke about before, the narrative of American exceptionalism, right? Is the United States and Western values, are those truly exceptional? The far left does not think that they are. Now, to go back to Israel, I have no problem with 20-year-old college kids who think that war is a terrible thing, because I agree, war is a terrible thing. What many of those 20-year-old college students are lacking is historical context, right? They're waving, they're wearing keffiyehs, and they're chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They don't know which river we're talking about. They don't know which sea we're talking about. And they're aligning themselves with people who openly support Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, ISIS in terms, right? Now, they're not familiar with the history of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're not familiar with the ideology of Hamas, which calls for the eradication of Israel in the 48 borders, not in the 67 borders, right? Hamas wants to kill all the Jews and kick all the Jews out of Israel. 8 million people. So I ask you a simple question. When a student stands on the campus of University of Pennsylvania and Columbia, and they yell from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, what exactly are they planning for the 8 million Jews who live in Israel?
And in that same vein, Dr. Golan, a lot of young people have, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, they have associated Israel with colonialism. They have associated Israel with genocide. What is your response to those that say that Israel is guilty of genocide and that the Palestinians and the cause of the Palestinians who live along that Gaza Strip are a group of people that they can identify with more as minorities, as people who have historically been oppressed?
Well, great question. First of all, the majority of Israelis thought that the Palestinians should have their own country, and in 2005, the Israeli government sent soldiers and police forces and forcefully removed every single Jew out of the Gaza Strip. So this is the 2005 withdrawal from Gaza. And after Israel did that, the Palestinians had their own strip of land. They could have done whatever they wanted with it. They chose to take the billions and billions of dollars that they received and to build an army to slaughter the Jews instead of building a society. That's the first thing. Second thing is everybody's talking about genocide. I mean, if you were talking about genocide in Syria, I would agree, because during the Syrian civil war, right, we had hundreds of thousands of civilians who were targeted by the Assad regime with the help of the Russians. They literally dropped bombs on civilian centers on purpose, trying to kill civilians. In Gaza, in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict over the last 50, 60 years, there's not been genocide. And you know how we know that? Because the population of Palestinians has grown during that period. If there is genocide, how can the population of the Palestinians grow over decades? Tremendously. I mean, not just a huge population growth. Now, again, where were the liberal professors who were protesting for civil rights when the Syrian genocide took place? Where are the progressive champions of human rights right now when in Bangladesh Hindus are being targeted and slaughtered? Where were they in the last 10 years, the Turkish government has targeted and ethnically cleansed parts of northern Syria and kicking the Kurds out? You haven't heard a thing. No Jews, no news.
As it pertains to the Israeli government, how do you view Netanyahu's handling of the Hamas conflict, being that many have criticized Netanyahu for propping up Hamas for many years, and now it's blown up in his face, obviously. For years.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, absolutely. Benjamin Netanyahu is a complete failure when it comes to the Hamas. Under his regime for the last 10 years, he's been in power for a long time with a few, small, short-lived governments in the middle. Bibi Netanyahu let Hamas grow in power. He's the one who allowed the Qatari government to funnel cash into the Gaza Strip. He's the one who's responsible. They build this cities and cities of tunnels underground. They build tens of thousands of rockets, and all the rockets that came from the Egyptian border, he allowed it. It's his blame. He was the one who was guarding his own watch, and he failed.
Dr. Golan, one of the things that your book, My Brother's Keeper, delves into is the intricate relationship between American Jews and Israel. Given the recent surge in Holocaust misinformation, how do you believe this distortion of historical facts influences American Jewish perceptions of Israel? Do you think it exacerbates existing tensions or creates new challenges in this relationship?
Mhm. Well, let's go to the source of the tension. The source of the tension, again, is that American Jews are politically liberal and Israeli Jews are more conservative. But it goes beyond it. American Jews are more secular than Israeli Jews. And so that's another key point of difference. Now, when it comes to misinformation regarding history, I don't see it as a danger only regarding American Jews. It's everybody. Mike, I've been playing a lot with AI, and I can generate today a video of you speaking that your viewers will never be able to decipher who the real Mike is and who is not. We are living in an age of misinformation, and AI is going to make it worse. When we spoke about history and rewriting history, this is happening all the time on college campuses, again, with far left professors who are rewriting American history. And remember, history matters, and people who lack historical context cannot make good decisions. We see this again with the war in Gaza. How familiar are your viewers who are supporting the Palestinian cause right now with the fact that Israel withdrew completely from Gaza in 2005? How familiar are they with the fact that Hamas does not share their progressive values, right? We always see the Queers for Palestine on every college campus. Do those Queers for Palestine realize that if they openly showed their sexuality in Gaza, they would be shot on the spot? And it's not just in Gaza, it's all around the conservative Muslim world, right? So this strange alliance between the so-called progressives and the jihadists, supporters of the jihadist movement, is an irrational one, and it comes from not having historical context and historical background, and from people getting their news from TikTok.
What do you believe are the most significant challenges facing Jewish educators and institutions today? How can these challenges affect the broader dialogue on Israel and American Jewish identity?
I think Jewish educators have the same challenges that all educators have. Our schools are not teaching students history, and their amount of historical literacy is very low. It's not only that. I wrote my dissertation, Mike, on coverage of nations in the news media in the United States. And did you know that scholarship from the last 40 or 50 years shows that less than 7 or 8 nations account for more than 90% of media coverage in the United States, right? Right now, there is a terrible war in Sudan. I mean, it's been on for over a decade, and over there, hundreds of thousands of people have died. Again, you never heard of it, no college protest, nobody cares, right? Why is that? Because most Americans don't know where the Sudan is. They don't. They never heard of it, right? Remember that, Dumb and Dumber, when they were confusing Australia and Austria? Well, there are 195 or 98 nations in the world. There are a lot of contested nations. And most Americans cannot, it's not only that they can't point Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan or Kazakhstan on the map. You can blame me for the same thing. I actually do know where Kazakhstan is, or any nation in Africa, but I'll bet you that most Americans cannot point out Yemen on the map, or Saudi Arabia, or Iran. Or I'll bet you most young college students cannot tell the difference in the religion between Iran and Saudi Arabia. If you don't understand the difference in the religious background of people in Iran and Saudi Arabia, you cannot speak about the Middle East, because there's been a Cold War between those two nations for over 2 decades. And that Cold War is shaping everything we see in the Middle East, including the civil war in Syria, civil war in Lebanon, what's happening right now in Yemen, in North Africa, and in the Gaza Strip.
As universities like Columbia grapple with public scrutiny over their handling of sensitive issues, what do you think are the key factors that should guide their approach to teaching about Israel and Jewish history? How can these institutions avoid exacerbating divisions or perpetuating misinformation?
We are right now experiencing a huge crisis in higher education. And the crisis in higher education is a crisis of trust. The American people do not trust universities. There's a Pew Research poll that I love to cite. They asked people, does the university overall have a positive or negative impact on society? 60% of conservatives said negative, about 45% of independents said negative, and about 20% of Democrats said negative. The university has no longer been a marketplace of ideas. It's a place where only one opinion can be heard. Conservative speakers are not welcomed on college campuses. Christian speakers are not welcomed on college campuses. And guess what? Comedians are not going to college campuses. Why? Because the number one value of college campuses is not to promote the marketplace of ideas and allow for open debate, but rather it's about pushing a political agenda. And that is not a good thing. And that's not what parents want when they send their children to college.
The recent scandal at Columbia University involving administrators and text exchanges in which university promised to launch a vigorous anti-Semitism and anti-discrimination training program as a result of that situation has, sparked intense debate about institutional responses to political and historical controversies. How do you think incidents like these impact the relationship between American Jews and Israel, especially in academic settings where such discussions are often in the forefront?
Great question. Well, American Jews are overrepresented in academia in a meaningful way. And again, American Jews are, many of them, progressive. So many of them, if you will survey American Jewish professors and you ask them where the sympathies lies in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, many of them are going to side with the Palestinian side, which is very surprising, right? But when it comes to anti-Semitism, and this is a new thing, most American Jews never experienced anti-Semitism. The United States is different than Europe. In Europe, anti-Semitism has been a national sport for 1,000 years, right? The governments will encourage anti-Semitism in Europe historically. But in the United States, there has never been institutionalized anti-Semitism. Never, ever, ever. In our book, we have a chapter called As American as Apple Pie. The Jewish people were welcome to the United States, just like many minorities were, and they became a part of the American dream. And you can find American Jews everywhere. I mean, Kamala Harris's husband is an American Jew. I mean, we see American Jews everywhere, right? Donald Trump's daughter was married to an American Jew. So American Jews are welcome to the highest circles of power. American Jews never experienced anti-Semitism in recent history. They heard about it from their grandparents, but it never happened on the streets of New York, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore. Now we see it for the first time. And this new surge may shift how American Jews vote in the upcoming election, but in my opinion, in a small way, maybe 3 to 5%.
And for those who are not familiar with the recent controversy, 3 Columbia University deans were put on leave in the summer after sending messages that disparaged Jewish panelists, and a 4th dean had been tenured, and he will remain at the university. But Dr. Golan, President Biden recently faced criticism for his nuanced stance on the Gaza conflict, specifically his assertion that the situation does not amount to genocide. Now, this has resulted in fracturing in the Democratic Party, really a fracturing that seems to be along the lines of generational lines. Mostly younger Democrats of color have taken a strong stance against the president on his position on Gaza. And you have in the state of Michigan a significant amount of Democratic primary voters who decided to intentionally vote uncommitted as it pertained to their decision to support the president for re-election before he withdrew his name for re-election in July 20th of this year. How do you think Biden's position on Gaza influences American Jewish support for Israel, and what are the broader implications of his position for the U.S.-Israeli relationship?
Well, President Biden has been a steadfast ally of Israel during this war. He and the mainstream of the Democratic Party support Israel unequivocally. And as Joe Biden said, I'm a Zionist, right? So the majority of Americans from both political parties support Israel by far. You can look at every public opinion poll. The majority of Americans support Israel because we share the same values. We're both democracies, right? Americans know better. They know that Hamas is a terrorist organization that hates America and hates the West. Now, the progressive voters in Michigan and in the swing states, well, they are a part of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which is small. It does not represent the majority of Democrats. And you see this, you see this in the Senate, you see this in Congress. They're a small minority within the Democratic Party. This is going to be a real challenge for Kamala Harris in the upcoming elections. And next week, when the protests come back to the Ivy League universities and during the Democratic convention, oh my God, Mike, you know what's waiting for Kamala Harris over there? They're going to shout her down. And she has a real challenge between appeasing the mainstream of the Democratic Party, which is, again, pro-Israel, and the small minority, loud and vocal minority, and often violent minority of progressives who do not represent the majority view within the party.
We saw a recent interaction between protesters at a Kamala Harris rally, and these rallies have been bringing in record numbers of audience members, so much so that Trump he's been perturbed by it. But you had a situation where you had Kamala Harris, president, getting interrupted, and she voiced her support for democracy, as her predecessors, President Biden, President Obama, even Secretary Hillary Clinton, have done when they were heckled. And she said that she supports a ceasefire. She supports coming to a negotiation, getting a settlement negotiation, bringing the hostages home. And then she got to, in a separate situation, she got to a point where she said, if you want Donald Trump to win, keep going, otherwise I'm speaking. And a lot of folks have resonated with that response because they thought, number one, that her position is more closely in alignment with those protesters' position than Donald Trump's. And she also asserted herself, as potentially the first female president, and made it known that while she's respectful of everyone's views and opinions, that she's not going to be drowned out. She's not going to be spoken over, and that she will, put folks in their place if need be. What is your response to those that say, well, if the DNC does experience a situation where there are protesters or hecklers, Kamala Harris's position being that she stepped out and before the president to support and demand for a ceasefire would kind of neutralize the noise that they would make, because all she would have to say is, I agree with you, please sit down and let me continue?
It's not going to be easy for Kamala Harris because it's not as easy as handling hecklers in a speech. She has to take a position. When you're a politician, you try to speak to everybody and appease everybody, but you can't do that in political campaigning. What is Kamala Harris's position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? How is she going to handle the Hamas movement and their jihadist intentions? And I don't think the people who are activists on the far left are going to be appeased by empty words from a politician. We all want ceasefires. All the Israelis want a ceasefire too. But we just want, the people who don't want a ceasefire, they understand the context of what a ceasefire means. What does it mean to have a ceasefire? Do you keep Hamas in power? Do you allow them to keep the hostages? Do you allow Iran to keep on funding a terrorist organization that aims to kill civilians, right? So again, Kamala Harris, and every politician out there has to take a moral stand, right? So if Kamala Harris is going to try to appease both the mainstream party and the activist wing of the party, she's not going to do well because people are too smart and they know better than to listen to politicians' empty words from the right or from the left. People, we're cynical. We've been exposed to so much political rhetoric. We want substance. Kamala Harris has to choose a side.
And while we're saying Harris has to choose a side, how should American Jewish leaders and organizations respond to the growing pro-Palestinian stance among Gen Z? What strategies do you think they should
Well,
employ to engage with
it's
this?
it's it's their children. It's their children. And many American Jews, as I said before, are pro-Palestinian. And I mean, when you look at American Jews, they are the most progressive group in the United States, pretty much. So American Jews are heavily weighted in progressive politics, and many of them have a real problem with Israel's occupation of the Palestinian people. They have a real problem with Israel's handling of the Hamas war. They have a real problem with the regime of Benjamin Netanyahu, which is a more right-wing regime. So, the same challenges facing, American Jews, they're seeing this in their own houses. Did you know that on the day that Kamala Harris, right after October 7th, and we talk about this in our book, Kamala Harris was taking a very strong pro-Israel stance right after October 7th, the atrocities of October 7th, where hundreds of people were taken hostage, women, children, dozens of women were grotesquely raped by terrorists, gang raped by terrorists. Kamala Harris took a strong stand for Israel. On the same day, her daughter was raising funds for Gaza on her Instagram platform. So again, this generational challenge is happening throughout the Democratic Party.
For those who are not Jewish, for those members of Gen Z who are of a minority group, but they still find themselves sympathetic towards the Palestinians because they're associating it with the Black Lives Matter movement. They're associating with, other social groups that are aimed at giving a voice to those who are oppressed or those who are marginalized. How do Israeli or American Jewish leaders, in order to secure, the next generation and in order to secure favor with the next generation, address these concerns while fostering a constructive dialogue about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Very simple. If you're watching this and you're like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, the Palestinians are the good guys, the Jews are the bad guys, ask yourself a very simple question. If you are a champion of any progressive cause, let's say you support trans rights, which country promotes trans rights? Israel or any Arab nation, right? And you can select, there are dozens of Arab nations and dozens of Muslim nations around the world. Where can you be openly trans in the street, in public? Where are you not going to be threatened with physical violence? Well, you can walk down Jerusalem, the holiest city in Israel, and you can walk around with a trans flag in drag. Nothing will happen to you. Why don't you try that in the neighboring countries? If you believe in women's rights, ask yourself, where do women have full rights? In Israel, where we've had a female prime minister, where Israeli women serve on the Supreme Court, and you can find them in every sector of public, life, or in every single country around you. So again, it's very nice to talk about, normative values, but let's talk about where those values are being demonstrated in everyday life. If you're a progressive, you should support Israel because Israel is a very progressive nation. And the Palestinian country is not a progressive nation. Please show me the gay pride parade in Ramallah or in Gaza or in Jenin. They don't have one. You know why? Because if there was a gay pride parade over there, all of those people would be shot. Israel has 2 gay pride parades, one in Jerusalem, one in Tel Aviv. They're pretty awesome.
Former President Trump recently claimed that Jewish voters who support President Biden, quote, do not love Israel and, quote, should be spoken to. How do you interpret these remarks in the context of the complex relationship between American Jews and Israel? Now, Donald Trump, of course, was responsible for moving the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He is claimed that he's the most pro-Israel president in American history. And he has expressed confusion as to why he hasn't received more support among American Jews. What do these comments reveal about the current state of political discourse regarding Jewish identity and the support for Israel?
Mike, we have a whole chapter on this. We have a chapter where we quote, every Jew who votes for the Democrats should have his head examined. I think that's what I'm paraphrasing Donald Trump. American Jews don't vote based on Israel. They vote based on their democratic values. They are members of the Democratic Coalition, and they vote just like any other Democrat on every cultural issue that matters. So I just had a conversation recently with an American Jewish professor. She's a good friend of mine. She's going to vote for Kamala Harris. And I asked her, what about the college anti-Semitism? And aren't you worried and concerned about that? She's like, yeah, but what about abortion? And that anecdote really represents American Jews. Again, the majority of American Jews don't care what Donald Trump did for Israel. It's true. It's not only that he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Donald Trump brought peace between Israel and Arab nations. He's the only one. I mean, Clinton did it, right? With the Oslo Accords. Obama received a Nobel Peace Prize based on potential. Donald Trump brought the Abraham Accords. Israel signed a peace treaty with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, and later with Sudan and Morocco. They normalized relations. So Donald Trump was a great friend of Israel, but guess what? American Jews do not vote based on Israel. They vote based on their democratic politics.
So, Dr. Golan, what do you say to those that say Donald Trump did not bring peace to Israel? What if you're confronted with someone that says, how can you say that when he, despite those who were in his ear in January of 2020, decided to go ahead and kill an Israeli general who was very popular, Soleimani? What if they say the Abraham Accords did indeed normalize relations between Israel and some Arab states, but they did not address the core conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, which remains the crux of instability in the region? And what if, to those who say, well, Trump's policies, particularly the decision to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem and recognize it as Israel's capital, significantly inflamed tensions with the Palestinians and the broader Arab world?
Great questions. Very simple. The Israeli-Palestinian issue is not the crux of the tensions in the Middle East. The problem in the Middle East, all the wars in the Middle East in the last 20, 30 years are due to the tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So let's take one by one. The civil war in Syria, where hundreds of thousands of people died. Now, you have to understand, in the war in Syria, more people died than in all of the Israeli-Arab, not Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Arab wars historically from 1948 till now, okay? Never heard of the Syrian civil war and all the carnage that took place there. Well, that has to do with the tension between the Sunnis and the Shiites, right? Assad is a Shiite who oppresses the majority Sunni people. They go to war, and with the help of the Russians, the minority Shiite people overtook the Sunnis and kicked many of them out of their own country. That's called ethnic cleansing, by the way. And that was with the help of the Russians, and the international community didn't do anything about it. Okay, let's take Yemen. In Yemen, there has been a civil war for more than 10 years. Hundreds of thousands of people died, and millions of people were displaced from their homes. Why? Minority Shiite group, right? The Houthis, who are supported by the Iranians, have been fighting with the Sunni leadership, who is supported by the Saudis. Okay, next, let's take Iraq. There has been a civil war going on ever since the Americans occupied it and then left, right? Why? Because the majority Sunni, who are not big fans of the Shiites, have been fighting with the Shiites. Sorry, the majority Shiites have been fighting with the Sunnis. I apologize for that. They're supported by Iran, and this is what led to the rise of ISIS. So the war in Iraq, hundreds of thousands of dead. The war in Yemen, hundreds of thousands of dead. War in Syria, hundreds of thousands of die. What does this have to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict again?
So during Trump's administration, Dr. Golan, we saw a marked increase in Israeli settlement activity in the West Bank, further complicating the already elusive two-state solution. Now, that, of course, comes after the infamous meeting between Netanyahu and Obama, when Obama, told Netanyahu, we're not going to support any more further settlements in the West Bank. And Netanyahu, from then on, that relationship was frayed between the two leaders. How do you assess the long-term impact of this expansion on the viability of a Palestinian state and on Israel's relationship with the international community, including key U.S. allies?
Mike, the only people who still believe in the two-state solutions are people who are part of the left in Europe and the United States, right? People in the State Department, they believe in Santa Claus and the two-state solution. That is long gone, especially after October 7th. The Israeli people gave support for the 2005 withdrawal from Gaza. They said, hey, let's see what the Palestinians will do if we give them their own nation, right? Fast forward 20 years, we got the answer, October 7th. If the Palestinians have their own nation with their own army, without Israeli presence over there, they're going to build armies and tunnels and arm themselves with tens of thousands of rockets like they did in Gaza, and they're going to kill Israeli civilians. After October 7th, there is not a single political party that's mainstream in Israel who will support a two-state solution. That is gone. The Palestinian people don't want a two-state solution because they don't want to live in peace with Israel. Every single public opinion poll in the West Bank since October 7th indicates that the majority of Palestinians support Hamas in what they did on October 7th, including the rapes, the kidnapping of children, and the murders. So there is not going to be a two-state solution. There is not any hope for settlement in the near term. Right now, it is war, and it's not pretty for either side.
With the recent flare-ups and violence that you alluded to, it's clear that the Abraham Accords did not deliver a comprehensive peace. Do you believe that Trump's policies, which largely sidelined the Palestinians, have made future negotiations more difficult? What strategies should be considered now to address unresolved issues that continue to fuel conflict?
Well, the purpose of the Abraham Accord was very simple. It aimed to reduce Iranian hegemony in the Middle East. Again, if you look at the map of the Middle East right now, from the western borders of Afghanistan until the seas of the Mediterranean, so Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, soon Jordan is about to fall. The Iranian hegemony is complete. Iran has conquered most of the Middle East. The purpose of the Abraham Accords has nothing to do with the Palestinians. It has to do with the Sunni nations, primarily Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Egypt, Jordan. They know that they're next, that the Iranians are going after them like they did in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. And the alliance between Israel and the Sunni nations makes a lot of sense. When President Obama delivered, and we have a whole chapter on the Iran deal in our book, when President Obama delivered the Iran deal, it was the Saudis who were the most against it. It was the people from the Gulf nations, right? The UAE who were totally against this. It was the Egyptians who were against it. Why? Because the people in the Middle East know what Iran is up to, and they're up to no good. And that's why they made peace with Israel, not because they like Israel. Trust me, people in Saudi Arabia like nothing about Israel. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend is exactly what you see in the Middle East with the Abraham Accords.
How do you think Trump's policies, particularly his support for Israeli settlement expansion, viewed in the broader U.S. forum in the Middle East? Could these decisions have lasting repercussions for America's role as a mediator in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I think the American people don't really care about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They didn't care about the Syrian conflict. They didn't care about the war in Iraq or the war in Yemen. Why is all the attention on Israel? It's a really good question. Again, remember my dissertation? 7 nations get more coverage than the rest of the nations in the world. One of those nations is Israel. Now, when it comes to the occupation of the West Bank, when it comes to settlements, it's very nice to talk about it from a theoretical point of view. But if you ever driven around the West Bank like I have, you would understand that the distance, the physical distance between the settlements and the Arab towns and regular Israeli towns within Israel is something like 20 miles, 10 miles, 5 miles at times. Imagine if somebody is living in San Diego, and on the other side of the border, there were people who wanted to slaughter and rape the civilians who live in San Diego. Would you not put a wall? Would you not provide security? Would you not give everybody guns? That is the reality of the Middle East. The Middle East is a tough, complicated place. And, talking about settlements or removing settlements, what does that mean? What does it mean if you say, okay, let's do a ceasefire tomorrow and let's give the Palestinians full sovereignty in the West Bank? Do you realize that they're right now in the West Bank, there are jihadist movements and their purpose is simple. They want to kill everybody in Israel. Would you sign up for this deal if you were an Israeli and they were 5 miles away from you? I wouldn't.
And a lot of American Jewish leaders in the political arena have written op-ed columns about their outrage about Trump's comments on Jewish voters, in which he said that those who vote for Biden, American Jews that vote for Biden, do not really care about Israel, do not love Israel. Now, these comments highlight a contentious intersection of identity and politics. How do you assess the role of such inflammatory rhetoric in shaping the broader conversation about Israel and Jewish identity in America? Do these folks who have taken issue with Trump's comments have a valid point that this was incendiary and an offensive to the Jewish American community?
Well, Mike, I mean, they're offended by Trump not because of what he said about Israel. They're offended by Trump because they're Democrats, and Democrats don't like Trump. I mean, it's simple as that. Now, if they were offended by Trump and his views on Israel, imagine how they would feel about Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib or Bernie Sanders or anybody from the squad. Their statements on Israel are much more offensive. But, American Jews, again, are not offended by Trump because of what he said, but because of who he is. They're not going to vote for Trump. Sociologically, they cannot vote for Trump. Remember, American Jews are more progressive than pretty much any other group in the United States and within the Democratic coalition.
But the connotation that if you vote for Biden, then that you're anti-Israel. For many, that was just that was too much to overlook. What do you say to those that say that is just outright offensive? And who is Trump to determine what the litmus test for being a Jewish voter is?
Well, I think it's not very different than Biden saying, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. Similar, right? I mean, so if Trump says, if you don't vote for me, you're not Jewish, right? I mean, it's the same thing. American Jews are not going to vote based on Israel. They don't vote that way. They vote based on democratic politics. They're Democrats, majority of them. About 20 to 30% will vote for Trump this year. And we saw this in the second Obama term, right? So again, Obama received 76%, I believe, in his first run for president. But after the Iran deal, his support diminished within American Jewish circles. I believe he received 71 to 72%. That swing margin, 5-6%, may be something we see in the next election. But remember, Mike, American Jews primarily live in 4 states. They live in New York, they live in Jersey, they live in Florida and California. In terms of numbers, that swing maybe it will make an impact in Pennsylvania, maybe, but not likely.
And Israel's on edge as it's bracing for a retaliatory attack from Iran in response to the Israeli attack, which took out significant Hamas leaders. With this escalating conflict between Israel and Hamas ongoing and the involvement of Hezbollah and Iran, we're witnessing a highly volatile situation that resonates for far beyond the Middle East. How do you see this current conflict shaping the relationship between American Jews and Israel? Are we at a turning point in how American Jewish communities perceive and support Israeli actions?
No, we're not. The war between Israel and Iran has been going on for 20 years. And against, between the Iranians and the Saudis, it's been going for 20 years through a bunch of proxy wars. With Israel, it's Lebanon and the West Bank and Gaza. Now we see it with the Houthis in Yemen, but it's not going to escalate beyond the Middle East. I actually am going to make a prediction here, and I'm probably going to be made to look a fool today as soon as the podcast is over. But I predict Iran will not do anything major because the Iranian Ayatollahs have no interest in endangering their empire. They make so much money selling oil. The Biden administration has allowed the Iranians to sell oil like crazy. They're making lots of money. And remember, the Palestinians are Sunnis. The Iranians are Shiites. They don't like each other. The Iranians don't care about the Palestinian people. They're using them as pawns in their war against Israel, against the Saudis, and against the West. So are the Iranians going to commit suicide in order to avenge the leader of Hamas? I doubt it.
And Dr. Golan, with this situation in Gaza deteriorating and the potential for greater involvement by Hezbollah and Iran, what do you think are the potential long-term implications for American Jews who advocate for a strong U.S.-Israel alliance? How might this conflict redefine the parameters of American Jewish support for Israel?
It will solidify it. I think the American people, regardless of their religion, understand that the Iranians are not the good guys. They see what the Iranians did in Syria and Iraq and in Lebanon and in Yemen. They don't want war. They want stability. Ask yourself a simple question, okay? Which nation brings stability to the Middle East? Is it Syria? Is it Gaza? Is it Libya? Or is it one democracy that has been standing there for 60 years where American soldiers and intelligence and aircraft carriers can use as a base? The Israeli Mossad works hand in hand with the CIA. Israel is an outpost of the West and of the United States in the Middle East. And it goes back to the conversation about the opposition to Israel amongst the progressives. They view not only Israeli involvement and presence in the Middle East as colonialist, they view any presence by the West as colonialist, right? They don't view presence by the Shiite government of Iran all around the Sunni world as colonialist, or Turkish presence and involvement all around the Arab world. Remember, Turks are not Arabs in the Middle East as colonialists. So again, this whole thing about colonialism and all of that typically boils down to not understanding the very complicated details of the Middle East, where you have a lot of different sects within religions and a lot of different intergroup conflicts. If you do not understand the difference between the Turkish and Qatari alliance around the Muslim Brotherhood and the Sunni alliance against Iran, you cannot understand the Middle East. And unfortunately, most 20-year-old college students who are shouting at the top of their lungs and who are going to interrupt Kamala Harris and scream genocide don't know anything about history, politics, or the Middle East.
As ceasefire negotiations unfold, there's an underlying tension between the desire for peace on one hand and the fear of future conflict on the other. How do you think American Jews are navigating this tension, especially those who have historically been strong advocates for a hardline stance on Israel's security?
Listen, if the Palestinians withdrew their jihadist motivations, and again, ask anybody who supports Palestinians and ask them, does Israel have the right to exist? Many of them would say, no, Israel does not have a right to exist. Mike, do you know of any other nation where people on college campuses are saying, Germany doesn't have a right to exist, or, Kyrgyzstan doesn't have a right to exist, or Mongolia doesn't have a right to exist? No, only one country in the world, right? Now, the security of Israel is not going away. Israel is going to be there for a long time. And those who support Israel will stay with Israel because they understand Israel is a beacon of democracy in a very unstable region of the world.
And finally, Dr. Golan, with the ceasefire talks bringing hope and uncertainty, what do you believe is the future of American Jewish advocacy for Israel? Is there a path forward that can reconcile the divergent views within the community while still maintaining strong ties with Israel?
Great question, Mike. So in our book, we talk about that. So you have two tribes of Israel, right? One in the United States, one in Israel. The Israeli Jews are conservative and more religious, and American Jews are liberal and mostly secular or reformed, right? Those two groups have a lack of a congruence in their political values and sociological values. But American Jews are changing because American Jews are intermarrying. About 60% of American Jews will marry outside the faith. Their children may be semi-Jewish. Their grandchildren are going to be Christian, most likely. And American Jews are having less children, right? So American Jews like most secular people, are not having a lot of children. And what you're probably going to see in the United States is the American Jewish community is going to become smaller, but it's going to become more religious and more conservative. And it's funny because this whole conversation about Israel and American Jews is very similar to the conversation about immigration and demographics in Europe right now. We see that the secular left is disappearing in numbers simply because they're not having many children, and the demographics of Europe are becoming reshaped by more conservative, more religious people.
And I know that was supposed to be my last question, but I do want to ask you about the fact that evangelical Christians have shown time and time again that they love Jews, while American Jews seem to distrust them. In your book, do you delve into this dynamic, and is there an explanation for this?
Sure, this is such a good topic. I was fascinated by it when I wrote it. We have a chapter called "Why American Evangelicals," or "Why Christian Zionists," rather. That's the better term for them. Love Jews. They love Jews in Israel. They love Jews in America. They love Jews everywhere because they are people of the Scripture, and they believe that Jesus was Jewish, and God wants the faithful to support the Jewish people because they're the chosen people. The next chapter in our book is why do American Jews distrust evangelical Christian Zionists? And the answer is simple, Mike. They distrust evangelical Christians on Israel for the same reason they distrust evangelical Christian on any other topic. American Jews belong to the far left and to the mainstream left, and evangelical Christians belong to the right.
Well, Dr. Guy Golan, thank you so much for the time that you spent on the Political Mic. Again, the name of the book is My Brother's Keeper, The Complicated Relationship Between American Jews and Israel. I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion and getting your perspective on these things and having your opinions represented on this platform. With that being said, that's going to conclude this episode of the Political Mic podcast. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mic podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.